Now let's see examples of some array manipulations. So here there is an array given over here, that is we have a list of names, right? And here the array constructor is used to create this array. So these names are passed as parameters to the constructor. Now what's our task? We have to just iterate. So this is our parent list. Now we will accept a name from the user as long as the user supplies a name or a string, and then we have to insert that string in the correct alphabetical order within this list. Okay, starting from the end, that is scanning from the end, we need to find an apt position for the newly supplied string by the user and insert into this particular array. Okay, so here we are going to use the prompt. Here we are going to use a JavaScript prompt to get user input, and note that how this prompt is embedded so that it loops for an infinite time until the user supplies a null string. Right, so this is actually the loops expands, or how the loops compound statement. Okay, so the loop actually extends from here to here. So let's see what keeps the while loop running. Okay, so if you observe this while loop, so this is actually the conditional part or the relational part that checks or keeps the while loop iterating. So what happens over here? Here a prompt is displayed to the user, that is to enter a name, and the default string is null string. Okay, if the user doesn't enter a particular string or input. Okay, so suppose user enters a valid string. So what happens? That valid string will be passed to new name. Right, and we know that if a string is there, string is part of a relational or conditional expression which while evaluates, then it is taken as a truthy. So what happens? The body of the while will be executed. Okay, so that is the condition which keeps this loop running. If a valid string of at least length 1 is entered, it will keep this loop running. Then what will break this loop? So if you enter a null string, that is if you just skip the prompt issued by JavaScript, right, what happens? By default you are entering null string, and other thing is default null string is set over here, right? So it will be assigned to this variable, and we also know that null string evaluates to a falsy, so this expression becomes false, so the body of while won't be executed. Okay, so we have now evaluated the case of how this while loop works. Now let's see what's within the body of while loop. So we already have a name list, right? So we are actually trying to find out the last index of the name list, so that index is kept in last variable. Now we have another while loop within this parent while loop. So what is within this inner while loop? So in the inner while loop, we are actually starting from the last position of the current list, and the new name variable holds the current input from the user, right? So we are checking whether new name is actually eligible to be placed in the last position of the list. Okay, so if it is eligible, right, or if new name is greater than okay, here the checking done is whether new name is eligible to enter into some other position of the list other than the last position. Okay, so if it is eligible, what should we do? We should shift the last element, that is current last element of the list, onto a new position of the list, right? That new position will be actually the last index plus 1 position. Okay, so to the last index plus 1 position we will shift the last element, and wherever the vacancy is there, right, we will have a vacancy, right? To that vacancy we will again shift the other elements in the list if they doesn't actually make the newly entered name in the proper place. Okay, so like that this check happens, and once this a position is reached for that particular the newly entered name, right, it is actually inserted into a spot, and then our task is what next to display the newly created list or newly modified list. So that is done using this for loop, right? And then what happens? This parent while loop starts. So what you have to notice here is, for each name entered by the user or for each prompt shown to the user, this insertion happens. So it is just like an insertion sort happening over here, and the list is dynamically modified. The list of array is dynamically modified, and hence we get a sorted name list. Now let's see another example which takes which considers two-dimensional array. Okay, so we just have discussed only examples containing one-dimensional array, right? So is it possible to have n-dimensional, or for simplicity let's consider a two-dimensional array? Okay, so it is possible to have a two-dimensional array. Just like in Python, we can have nested arrays, that is arrays within arrays. So if you consider this nested array variable, right, it is pointing to an array of how many elements? Of 3 elements, and each element is an array, in turn an array of size 3 each. Okay, so if I want to represent them in matrix format, okay, so it will be a 3 by 3 matrix, right? So this will be the first row, that is the first element of this greater array will be the first row, the second element will be the second row, third element will be the third row. So actually we are listing out the rows of the two-dimensional array within the outer array brackets. Okay, now how will we print them? So what we have to do, we have to select the individual rows and then we have to print the individual rows. So what we are doing in this for loop, so this is the parent for loop. This parent for loop actually iterates through individual rows. So the first row position is 0 of this parent, right, of this greater array. The index 0 holds the first row. So we are actually iterating over the rows, right? So the index 0 will have the first row. Now for the index 0, what we have to do, we have to print the individual elements. So here a nested array of 0, or the first index 0 will hold the first row. Then if I iterate or vary the column across 0 to 2, I will get the individual elements of this array, right? So that is printed. So just like that, it is iterated 3 times, so I will be able to print the 3 rows. So that is displayed over here.